Dawn broke over northern France on May 20th, 1943. The air above the hedgerows shimmered with the heat of engines and the static of distant radios. From the east came the low growl of Daimler-Benz engines, Messerschmitt Bf 109s, hunting as they had done for years, confident kings of the sky. The Luftwaffe pilots laughed over the radio waves, mocking reports from ground observers. Thunderbolts? One sneered. Flying anvils, not fighters. Luftwaffe Combat Net Intercept, May 1943. Then the sky erupted. From the west, sunlight glinted off the silver fuselages of the 56th Fighter Group. 8 massive 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 per wing, roared in unison, their tracers slashing through the morning haze like red-hot needles of death. Within seconds, a pair of Messerschmitts disintegrated mid-roll, fragments spinning earthward in spirals of smoke and flame. The German formation broke in panic. The laughing stopped. U.S. 8th Air Force Mission Report 1943. Below, farmers working their fields froze as the new American aircraft thundered overhead. The P-47 Thunderbolt, derided as too heavy, too slow, too clumsy, had arrived in Europe. Its debut was anything but elegant. The Thunderbolt's takeoffs from muddy English runways were awkward. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine bellowed like an angry animal as it fought for altitude. Mechanics cursed its sheer size. It was nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire. Early pilots complained of sluggish controls. Yet in the hands of determined men, it was about to turn the tide of the air war. U.S. Army Air Forces Pilot Debrief, May 1943. At 10:42 a.m., Captain Francis Gaby Gabreski sighted another flight of 109s above Rouen. He pushed the throttle forward, the massive turbo supercharger spooling to life with a shriek. The P-47 surged ahead, heavy but unstoppable. Its weight, once mocked, gave it stability in a dive that no German fighter could match. Gabreski dove from 25,000 feet at over 500 miles per hour, a thunderbolt descending from heaven. One burst from his 8 Brownings shredded a Messerschmitt from tail to nose. Gabreski Combat Diary, 1943. The Luftwaffe's confidence, once unshakable, began to crack that spring. For years, German pilots had dominated the skies of Europe. Their Bf 109s and FW 190s were light, agile killers built for quick-turning dogfights. The P-47 was the antithesis of that philosophy, a brute of aluminum and firepower, designed not for grace but for endurance and punishment. U.S. Air Technical Intelligence Brief, 1943. It had been born from the desperate lessons of 1940. When the Luftwaffe nearly destroyed Britain's defenses, American engineers at Republic Aviation realized that survivability, not speed alone, would decide the next war. Chief designer Alexander Kartveli conceived an aircraft built around the most powerful radial engine in existence. His prototype was less a fighter and more a flying fortress in miniature. Armor plating, self-sealing tanks, and 8 guns instead of the usual 4. Pilots nicknamed it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. Republic Aviation Design Notes, 1942. In England, the first squadrons of the 8th Air Force received their Thunderbolts with skepticism. Many preferred the nimble Spitfire. British ground crews shook their heads. They doubted this American beast could ever chase down a 109. But as bomber losses over occupied France mounted, desperation demanded something new. The P-47 was deployed as escort, its range barely enough to cover the Channel, but its durability soon shocked even its critics. RF Operational Diary, April 1943. On May 13th, the Luftwaffe launched an interception raid over Lille. A formation of B-17s lumbered toward their target, braced for the familiar shriek of German fighters. But this time the escorts did not scatter. When the 109s dove, the P-47s met them head-on, guns blazing. One American aircraft took 21 hits from 20mm cannon shells and still made it home. U.S. Bomber Command Loss Analysis, May 1943. In Berlin, reports filtered in describing a new American fighter capable of absorbing punishment that would shatter any Messerschmitt. "It cannot climb," one German staff officer wrote dismissively, "but it does not die." Luftwaffe Technical Evaluation Memo, June 1943. By summer, the skies over Western Europe had become an aerial forge of experimentation and adaptation. The Luftwaffe still held numerical superiority in the air, Their pilots were veterans of Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. The Americans were newcomers, green, untested, often terrified. But their machines were built for survival. Even in defeat, a Thunderbolt could limp home, its oil-leaking wings shredded, and still deliver its pilot back to base. U.S. Air Transport Command Recovery Log 1943. The Germans didn't understand it yet, but the nature of the air war was changing. Where once agility had ruled, now endurance, firepower, and range began to matter more. The Allies weren't fighting for brief duels. They were fighting for the skies above an entire continent. And the P-47 was about to become their spearhead. By August 1943, bomber raids deep into France required constant protection. German fighters waited at predictable points, conserving fuel until the lumbering B-17s approached. They expected light escorts, quick, fragile interceptors that would peel away once their fuel ran dry. But when the Thunderbolts appeared, their 50 calibers tore through the Luftwaffe's ambush patterns. Bf-109 pilots reported entire wings being erased in seconds. 8th Fighter Command Summary, OG 1943. Still, within the U.S. Air Force, doubts persisted. The Thunderbolt was expensive, complex, and heavy on fuel. Generals debated replacing it with the sleeker P-51 Mustang. But in that crucial summer, the P-47 held the line. It became a symbol of brute American will, an indestructible guardian that gave Allied bombers a fighting chance. The laughter that had greeted its arrival faded into uneasy silence. Pilots who once mocked its bulk now feared the streaking trails of its tracers. The Luftwaffe learned to identify the distinct, throaty roar of its radial engine, the sound that meant death from above. By late 1943, German intelligence issued new directives. Avoid combat with Thunderbolt formations above 20,000 feet. Engage only with numerical superiority. Oberkommando der Luftwaffe Directive, Oct. 1943. But the Americans weren't done yet. Behind the front lines, engineers in New York and Massachusetts were already preparing the next leap forward. Reworked superchargers, long-range tanks, and new tactics that would push the Thunderbolt deeper into enemy territory. For now, though, the skies of France burned with a new light, a blinding storm of lead and thunder that no one could ignore, because what began as laughter in the Luftwaffe's radio chatter was turning into disbelief, and soon, that disbelief would turn into terror. When the Thunderbolt's hidden power was finally unleashed, they called it the engine that won the air war. Deep inside the Pratt & Whitney plant in Hartford, Connecticut, thousands of workers, men and women alike, labored day and night under the glow of arc lamps, assembling the beating heart of America's aerial juggernaut, the R-2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, twin-stage supercharging. It was a masterpiece of brutal precision. Engineers like Leonard Hobbs and George Meade designed it to thrive at altitudes where others gasped for air. With it, the P-47 Thunderbolt became less an airplane and more an airborne battering ram. Pratt & Whitney Engineering Bulletin, 1943. The Germans never saw it coming. They believed the Americans would continue building fragile, lightweight interceptors, machines optimized for short-range duels. Instead, they unleashed the heaviest single-seat fighter of the war, capable of matching the speed of an FW-190 in a dive and outclimbing it above 25,000 feet. The Luftwaffe's pilots couldn't understand how this lumbering jug could suddenly appear at their flanks and vanish in a blur of contrails. Luftwaffe Intercept Report, July 1943. Its secret was hidden deep inside its belly, a massive General Electric CH-5 turbo supercharger connected by a maze of ducts and intercoolers. This machine compressed thin, icy air at high altitude and fed it back into the roaring engine, maintaining full power where others sputtered. Engineers at General Electric's Lynn Works tested prototypes in altitude chambers, simulating the cold void of the stratosphere. "We had to teach the engine to breathe where men could not," recalled lead technician Charles Babbitt. Turbo Division Logbook, 1943. But the Thunderbolt's true genius lay in its survivability. Its fuselage was built like an armored capsule, thick aluminum skin, steel plates around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks. Pilots joked they flew a tank with wings. Messerschmitt's cannon shells would burst harmlessly against its frame. Fragments rattled like hail inside the fuselage, but the pilot lived to fly another day. U.S. Army Air Force's Engineering Test Report, June 1943. Each wing carried 4 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, firing 13 rounds per second per gun. At full burst, that was 6,240 rounds per minute, each bullet capable of piercing an aircraft's armor or igniting its fuel. When the Thunderbolt opened fire, the sound was a low stuttering thunder audible from miles away. It was like a saw cutting the sky apart, remembered Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group. Johnson Combat Memoir, 1945. In July 1943, that firepower met its ultimate test over the French coast near Abbeville. It was 0730 hours when the 78th Fighter Group received orders to escort a formation of B-17 flying fortresses bound for the rail yards at Amiens. 48 P-47s climbed from Duxford Airfield, their silver wings catching the morning sun. Below them, the channel glittered like molten glass. German radar stations along the coast detected them at 0830. "Find Verband Nordwestlich, 20 plus," radioed one observer. Within minutes, 109s of JG-26, the famed Abbeville boys, scrambled to intercept. Their commander, Major Joseph Pips Priller, grinned as he climbed into his FW-190A5. "The fat American planes are ours today," he told his wingman. Bundesarchiv Combat Diary, July 1943. At 09:15, the two formations collided near the Somme River. The Thunderbolts dove first. Their pilots, briefed on German tactics, refused to turn or climb. They attacked head-on using raw speed and firepower. Lieutenant Eugene O'Neill led the first strike. He fired a 3-second burst at 400 yards. His tracers walked across a 109's fuselage, the canopy exploding outward in a bloom of fire. 8th Fighter Command After-Action Report, July 1943. The Germans tried to counter with tight turn engagements, but the Thunderbolt wouldn't play their game. Instead, it climbed vertically, rolled and dove again, using its immense weight as a weapon. Each dive pushed the airframe beyond 500 milliparis, speeds that made the Luftwaffe's lighter planes shudder and lose control. One FW-190 disintegrated mid-dive, its wings torn from the fuselage. "They dive like stones," a surviving pilot radioed in panic. Luftwaffe radio intercept, July 1943. By 0945, the sky above Abbeville was a maelstrom of twisting contrails, tracer lines, and burning wrecks. In just 20 minutes, the Thunderbolts claimed 16 kills for the loss of 2 aircraft. Both pilots rescued after bailing out over the channel. When the group returned to Duxford, ground crews counted dozens of bullet holes across the surviving planes, but none had failed. U.S. 78th FG Combat Summary, July 1943. That battle marked a turning point. The Luftwaffe began to withdraw from daytime engagements over northern France. Their commanders demanded new tactics and higher altitudes, but the Thunderbolt supercharger meant the Americans owned the stratosphere. "We cannot outclimb them anymore," lamented one German ace. "They are faster, higher, and they never die." Oberkommando Report, Fogger 1943. The technical mastery behind the Thunderbolt came from more than just factories. It was a symphony of American industry. At Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant, 20,000 workers turned out up to 15 aircraft per day. Assembly lines roared as women riveters sealed the armored fuselage panels, sparks raining around them. Over at Goodyear, rubber technicians perfected self-sealing fuel tanks, their experimental linings saving thousands of lives. War Production Board Bulletin, 1943. Meanwhile, field units in England modified the aircraft for European conditions, replacing oxygen regulators, tweaking gun harmonization, even repainting with matte camouflage to reduce glare. The men of the 4th Fighter Group customized their jugs with nose art and improvised drop tanks made from belly-mounted fuel drums. Innovation became survival. U.S. 4th FG Maintenance Log, 1943. By autumn, the P-47 had matured from a clumsy brute into a precision weapon. Its K-14 computing gun sight, introduced late that year, calculated deflection automatically, allowing pilots to strike with surgical accuracy. AF Technical Order 08-1543, 1943. The Luftwaffe's once lethal head-on attacks now ended in disaster. "They fire before we even cross paths," wrote one German pilot. "It is as if their guns can see the future. Bundesarchiv Pilot Notes 1943. As winter descended, the Thunderbolt's next evolution began. Engineers developed auxiliary fuel tanks to extend its reach beyond 500 miles. Soon the Jug could escort bombers deeper into enemy territory, past the Rhine toward Berlin itself. This was the nightmare the Germans had feared, a war machine that could protect bombers all the way to the heart of the Reich. AAF Development Division Memo, DEC 1943. But the Thunderbolt's role was expanding. Its immense durability made it perfect for ground attack. Fitted with bombs and rockets, it could obliterate trains, convoys, and tanks. One pilot called it a one-man artillery battery. US 9 Tactical Air Command Report, Jan 1944. The enemy could laugh no longer. Even the sound of a distant radial engine made German troops dive for cover. "Thunderbolts are worse than artillery," wrote one Wehrmacht soldier in a letter home. "They come from nowhere and leave only fire." Captured Wehrmacht correspondence, 1944. What began as a misunderstood machine had become a symbol of overwhelming power. Engineered perfection fused with raw industrial might. The Thunderbolt was not elegant. It was not graceful. But it was unstoppable. And as the Allies prepared to invade Fortress Europe, one question remained. Could even the Jug survive the inferno to come? By the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. Every sunrise brought the same sound, the deep, steady thunder of Pratt & Whitney engines echoing over the fields of northern France. Farmers and soldiers alike looked up to see a horizon streaked with contrails, each line marking the advance of Allied air power. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once mocked as a flying anvil, had become a symbol of relentless dominance. U.S. Strategic Air Forces Europe Summary, March 1944. In March alone, the 8th and 9th Air Forces flew more than 16,000 sorties with Thunderbolts, escorting bombers and strafing ground targets from Normandy to the Ruhr. For every American pilot lost, German records showed 3 to 5 aircraft destroyed. Luftwaffe Verlustmeldung April 1946. The balance had shifted. The Luftwaffe was dying, not with a single decisive blow, but by 1,000 hammer strikes from the Jug's 50-caliber guns. Psychologically, it was devastating. German pilots described nightmares of the Jug's silhouette, looming from the sun, heavy and implacable. "They do not fear us," one veteran wrote after a near miss over Cologne. "They come at us even when alone. It is like fighting a machine, not a man." Bundesarchiv Pilot Interrogation Record 1945. But the Thunderbolt's greatest power was not just fear, it was reach. The engineers who had once struggled to make the machine airborne now worked feverishly to extend its endurance. At Lockheed Vega's Modification Center, long-range fuel systems were installed. Belly tanks, wing tanks, even droppable aluminum drums. The P-47D-25 model could now fly nearly 800 miles, enough to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. AF Engineering Division Specification 47D-25, 1944. When that happened, the strategic calculus of the war changed overnight. The Luftwaffe could no longer ambush the unguarded bomber streams. Their home skies, once their sanctuary, were now death traps. German cities burned under round-the-clock bombardment, while P-47s prowled the escape corridors, cutting down interceptors before they even reached the bombers. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Thunderbolt had evolved into a new beast entirely. As Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, over 1,500 Jugs filled the sky. They didn't just guard the air, they owned it. Fitted with 500-pound bombs and 5-inch rockets, they ripped apart German positions from the Cotentin Peninsula to Caen. Radar stations, bridges, and tanks vanished under waves of fire. Pilots described flying so low, their propellers kicked up sea spray from the channel, like Tactical Air Command Operational Report. June 1944, Colonel Francis Gabreski led one such sortie near St. Lo. He spotted a German convoy hidden under trees, a column of trucks, tanks, and half-tracks. Diving from 10,000 feet, his P-47 screamed through the air, bomb racks emptying in a single coordinated burst. The explosions turned the forest into a rolling wall of flame. "It was like striking God's match," he said afterward. Gabreski Mission Log, June 1944. For ground troops, The Jug became both guardian angel and avenging hammer. Soldiers of the 2nd Armored Division recalled the distinct roar of its radial engine as the sweetest sound in war. "When you heard that, you knew the bad guys were about to get hell," wrote one tank commander. U.S. Army 2nd Armored Diary, July 1944. For the Germans, it was the opposite. Thunderbolt terror, they called it. Donnerkeil Angst. Infantrymen would scatter at the first echo of its guns. Even tanks were no refuge. The P-47's rockets, capable of piercing up to 60 mm of armor, turned Panthers and Tigers into blazing wrecks. Captured Wehrmacht Technical Report, 1944. Behind that frontline dominance stood an invisible army, the engineers, mechanics, and factory workers who kept the Jug flying. At Republic Aviation, women worked 12-hour shifts riveting fuselage panels, while machinists in Buffalo shaped precision turbine blades by hand. At forward airfields in France, grease-stained crew chiefs changed engines in rain and mud, often under shell fire. Each thunderbolt that roared into the sky represented thousands of coordinated hands. War Production Board Report, 1944. Logistics became the quiet miracle of the Thunderbolt campaign. Spare parts arrived in wooden crates marked assembly ready. Mechanics swapped wings and engines between damaged aircraft in hours, keeping squadrons at 90% readiness even in combat zones. Air Maintenance Command Summary, 1944. That industrial rhythm, American production meeting battlefield necessity, crushed the Luftwaffe's last hope of recovery. By the fall of 1944, the Luftwaffe's losses were catastrophic. Their best aces were dead, their fuel reserves collapsing. American intelligence intercepted desperate orders, urging pilots to conserve ammunition. "Engage only if unavoidable," one directive read. "Avoid Thunderbolts entirely." Oberkommando der Luftwaffe Order 23-4744. Still, the Germans fought on. Over the Ardennes in December, as snow fell over the front lines, the Battle of the Bulge erupted. For weeks, cloud cover grounded most Allied aircraft. But when the skies cleared on December 23rd, the Thunderbolts returned like an avenging storm. From dawn to dusk, the 365th and 404th Fighter Groups pounded the roads leading to Bastogne. Convoys were shredded, bridges shattered, and retreating armor annihilated. In one day alone, Thunderbolts destroyed 600 vehicles. They turned the road to Houffalize into a graveyard of steel, reported a U.S. Army observer. Feist Tactical Air Command Report, DEC 1944. The Luftwaffe attempted one final gasp, Operation Bodenplatte. New Year's Day 1945. Hundreds of German fighters struck Allied airfields in Belgium, hoping to cripple the invaders' air power. They succeeded in surprise, but at a terrible cost. As the smoke cleared, the surviving P-47s retaliated in coordinated vengeance. By week's end, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly 300 aircraft, effectively ending its ability to contest the air. Allied Air Forces Western Europe Report, Jan 1945. From that point forward, the sky belonged entirely to the Jug. By war's end, the P-47 had flown more than 500,000 combat sorties and destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft. But its truest impact lay on the ground. Tens of thousands of tanks, trucks, and trains obliterated, severing the arteries of Hitler's war machine. U.S. Air Force Historical Study number 65, 1946. When victory came in May 1945, veterans of the 8th and 9th Air Forces gathered in England to toast their comrades and their machines. Some had switched to the new P-51 Mustang by then, but they never forgot the Jug. "She was ugly," said one mechanic, "but she brought our boys home." Veteran interview 1946. The Thunderbolt's legacy outlived the war. It became a blueprint for post-war air doctrine, survivability, firepower, and adaptability over elegance. The Korean War's F-84 Thunderjet carried its DNA. Decades later, the A-10 Thunderbolt II, another armored beast with a fearsome gun, would inherit both its name and its mission, to protect soldiers on the ground through sheer, unrelenting firepower. U.S. Air Force Design Heritage Brief, 1975. Historians would later call it the hammer of the Allied air war. Engineers would remember it as the triumph of logic over fashion, a machine that succeeded not because it was perfect, but because it was unbreakable. In a war that spanned oceans and continents where ideology met industry, the P-47 stood as proof that strength and endurance could outlast brilliance and speed. The Germans laughed at it once. They never laughed again, as one captured pilot reportedly told his interrogators, staring at a photo of a Thunderbolt squadron lined wing to wing. "We had aces. You had factories." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. And as the sun set over a Europe finally free of tyranny, the sound of its engines still echoed across the sky. An iron hymn to the men who built it, the pilots who flew it, and the nation that forged thunder into victory.